Hey guys, John Polemy here, Actionable Intelligence. Today's Saturday, December 28th, 2019, and this is the weekly market update. Hope everyone had a joyous and enjoyable Christmas. We're heading into the new year. If you haven't already seen the video, I made a 2020 predictions video. Some of the ideas that I think that are going to be fruitful next year, you may want to take a look at it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. This week, it's pretty much going to be a potpourri. I'm not going to be focusing on any single issue. There's a lot of news out there. Some of the things that we're following in the Actionable Intelligence Alert, some of the things that we have been forecasting are now starting to come to fruition. So we will do some updates on that. One of the first things I want to get into in this week's reality check, though, and I'm going to do it dispassionately as possible. On December 20th, the Dutch Supreme Court ruled that the country must cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the end of 2020. Now, to give some context to this had already been decided, I think, 2012 or 2013. There had been some appeals. There had been monkeying around in the court system. Basically, activists, Greens, were taking the government to task for not meeting its announced greenhouse gas reduction goals. So they have been fighting in court for several years, and a decision came down from the Supreme Court of the Netherlands that, in fact, the government has been reticent in its carrying out of its goals, and that it needs to move expeditiously to meet its emissions reductions, which constitute a 25% reduction by the end of 2020. Now, I'll get back to that in a minute. Let's go over some of the other things that were said, because I think it ties into one of the things that I've been forecasting, which is more of this ESG movement, more of this green movement taking over in the West, the self-immolation of the West, its destruction of its capitalist legacy, mostly due to this environmentalism. So basically, this is what the presiding judge said after the judgment of the decision. Quote, "The lives, well-being, and living circumstances of many people around the world, including in the Netherlands, are being threatened. Those consequences are happening already." Well, reasonable people can disagree. I think people on my side are pretty reasonable. We have to define our words, what climate change means. Yes, I believe the climate changes. It's a historical fact. It's a geological fact. Okay? It's been established. The cause of climate change is either natural variance that the Earth goes through based on various factors of the oceans, the sun, cloud cover, volcanic activity. All kinds of things contribute to climate change, or either exacerbating it or limiting it. However, we have this other view on the other side, that this is all caused by CO2, and CO2 is the control knob that's taking us to a where the lives are being threatened by this. That's what the presiding judge said. He went on to say, which I find frightening, and which I think is going to be a cornerstone of what we see in the next several years. The presiding judge ruled that Articles 2 and 8 of the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms, aka the right to life and the right to respect for private and family life, brings climate change under the umbrella of human rights protections. So do you see where this is going? It's now a fundamental human right that we do something about CO2 and climate change. Netherlands has Supreme Court there. That's the highest court. There's nobody to overturn it. First of all, let's just be realistic here. There's no way that the Netherlands is going to be able to cut their greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by the end of next year. It's not going to happen. However, the trend is in place now. So you should see them going through more onerous, strict regulations. I don't know their generation mix. I don't know how much cement making and steel making capacity they have there, industrial capacity, if they heat homes with gas, what electric car penetration is. But now that the court has ruled, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this really is carried out in real time. Will it be expeditious? Will they throw themselves on the sword? Will they destroy their economy to do this in the next couple of years, or will they try to drag it out and minimize it as much as possible? It remains to be seen. What I'm saying to you, though, is that I think this is setting a precedent, because this isn't the only place that this is happening. This ruling will bolster other people in the European Union and other countries to file similar lawsuits, and they will win, because this is the zeitgeist in the West and in a lot of places in the world. Similar lawsuits are happening in Belgium, Canada, Colombia, Ireland, Germany, France. New Zealand just passed a big deal down there. It was bipartisan, 100% renewables, I believe, by a certain date. So we're going to have these test cases where some of these countries are deciding that they're going to violate the laws of physics, and that they're going to think that they can maintain their standard of living and try some of these things. And maybe I'll be proved wrong. Maybe you can go from more dense energy sources to less dense energy sources and still have the same standard of living. I don't think you can. No one's ever done it before. But, I'm sure that Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who is certainly an expert, I'm sure, on energy and energy, different types and physics and engineering, she's got this all figured out. But we'll see, because it'll be a tightly controlled little experiment there on the island of New Zealand to see if they can do this and maintain their standard of living. Let's see if people like blackouts and high prices, and we'll see. I think that, this is really, without being too sarcastic, this really is the trend, and we need to get ready for it as speculators, because it's going to create a lot of distortions in the markets. It's going to create a lot of opportunity. It's going to create more political and social and economic chaos. There's no discussion. None of this is happening in the places where CO2 is increasing exponentially, which is in Asia, specifically India and China. They're not going to stop industrializing. They're going to continue to use coal. I just told folks on this last week on this call, this video, the Chinese are rapidly expanding their coal burning generation. Same thing in India. These people are industrializing. These people are modernizing. And it's the cheapest, easiest way for them to do it. Yeah, they're building up their nuclear fleets, and yes, renewables are being part of it, but they understand that they have to have a generation mix. You're not going to run a large country like India or China 100% on renewables. It's not possible. So, according to a recent report by the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, the country is unlikely to meet the 25% reduction target. No kidding. You could do it. You just have to stop like a lot of commerce. And then the economy would collapse into a depression, and then these people would be voted out. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. I think maybe they will go for it. I don't know. We'll see. I'm just telling you that when you go from less dense, less reliable energy or you go from more dense to less dense, you're gonna have a lower standard of living. You're gonna have to spend more for power and electricity, and for the backups for the to overcome the intermittency. I know people are going to write me and say, well, batteries, John. Where are these batteries? Where are you going to get all the battery metals? It's a spreadsheet exercise. You can figure out how much nickel and cobalt, lithium that you need for a certain amount of kilowatt storage, and then you just extrapolate it. It's just a spreadsheet exercise, and the resources don't exist. Now, there's new technology, I'm sure. I think there's some confusion also. I've said this before. I just want to remind people. Battery technology, batteries are chemistry. It's a chemical process that happens inside of a battery. And so it doesn't respond to efficiency and cost reductions like Moore's law does to silicon chips, where you have a doubling of processor capacity and a halving of prices every year to 18 months. That's not going to happen in batteries, because you're limited by the efficiencies, the chemistry and the physics will start to limit you. Now, I'm not saying there won't be new technologies. There will be. But from technology in a lab to being engineered to large-scale rollout, that's 10 or 15 years again. See, this is another thing. People come at me with all these solutions, but they're lab-based. People, like even in uranium, talk about thorium. It's not realistic right now. Down the road, it may be. It's just cheaper and easier to use uranium. That's why we use it. It's cheaper and easier to use natural gas and oil. That's why we use it. It's ubiquitous and easy to use, transportable. I mean, people have this view that, it's just a bunch of greedy people trying to poison the earth. Actually, the earth's cleaner than it's ever been. My question is, and like I said, I'm trying to be as dispassionate about this as possible because it really riles me up, is will people actually accept a lower standard of living for their virtue signaling? Well, we're going to see, because this is the trend. Lawsuits have been filed in the United States against Exxon and some other folks, specific to the Exxon lawsuit, that supposedly they did a study back in 1982 or 1980, and they knew the climate change. Well, that really wasn't the study. The study was to take all the available published material on potential for climate change and analyze it. That's what the study was. It wasn't a fake study so they could justify using hydrocarbons. Look, even people that are for like renewables and think that they're doing the right thing, they still take their kid to soccer practice a half hour away from their house in an F-150. People say one thing and then they do something else. And that's why I think this statement here at the end is what I really want to see. Now, I think that's the trend. I think that especially the younger generation, millennials and Generation Z, have been fed this from infancy all the way through school. And like I've said before, once you get an idea into your head, it's very hard to get it out or change your mind. So they've been told that the earth is going to end. A lot of them believe it. So they want something done. And that's why we're seeing, they're going to be the new leaders over the next 10, 20 years. They're going to transition into leadership positions. And I suspect we'll see even more of this. We'll see more lawsuits. We'll see more demonization of, traditional forms of power generation. And we'll just see how much of a lower standard of living people are willing to accept. That'll be the interesting thing. Or if they just outsource everything to China and just pretend like China and India don't exist, which seems to be happening now, just outsource all steel production to China. They can ship right now, a lot of the turbine components for a lot of the turbines are shipped from overseas anyways. You're not manufacturing anything in the United States anyways. A lot of this stuff comes in by ship. One of the dirtiest ways to transport things. I mean, this whole thing is just, people just don't know. It goes back to, like I said, go on YouTube and watch like old videos of jaywalking, when Jay Leno used to go out onto the street and ask the common man simple questions, such as, where does bread come from? You know what people would say? The grocery store. They have no conception of what goes into planting, growing, harvesting, transporting, processing, baking up a loaf of bread. They just go to the grocery store and pull a loaf off for $2.99. And other questions: where does electricity come from? The plug in the wall. People just don't know these things, and so it's easy to emotionally tap into create a zeitgeist, and then when people are ill-informed or misinformed, then they aren't able to make a real good decision. If people really cared about CO2, the best way to get rid of it is to get rid of all coal and natural gas plants and build nuclear plants. That would be, no one's talking about that though. If you want STEM jobs, if you want high-paying construction jobs, if you want infrastructure, if you want something to invest in, how about this as a policy? I've said this as a policy before. Trump should run on this. 110. We're going to build 100 new reactors in the United States over the next 10 years. And how we're going to do it is, yes, we're going to have some federal guarantees. It's going to be public-private partnerships. It's going to be standardizing maybe 2 or 3 designs so that they can rapidly go through the process, so that parts and construction techniques can be standardized and lower the cost of construction and permitting. And look what you would get: nuclear engineers, mechanical, civil, electrical engineers, okay? You would need a ton of these people. Just the infrastructure, mandate that, the parts have to come from the U.S. If you want to build a nuclear reactor and you need a containment vessel, that's a forged product. I mean, they do that in Japan. There's one company in Japan that does it, and one, I believe, in Russia that does it, where this metal is just pounded out and create these vessels, okay? Mandate that you have that here. Those would be high-paying jobs. There's no discussion of it. Not going to happen. We're building one reactor over in South Carolina, or North Carolina, Georgia, sorry, Vodal Power, I believe. So anyways, just wanted to touch on this because it's an indication of the forecasting that I'm doing around this whole ESG and the fourth turning of this younger generation who has had this stuff put in their mind from day one. I mean, that's where the conflict comes, right? Because myself, I come from the energy industry. I didn't see I didn't have this pounded into my head. So I look at it a different way. If you've had something put in your head from day one, the majority of these people, or a large portion of them, I don't want to say a majority, I don't know what the polling is, but a large majority of them, think that we need to do something radical right now because the Earth's going to end in 10 years. I mean, this is what they're being told. They've been told this their whole life, and they believe it. All right, moving on. This is an example. I wanted to bring this up. This is stock of Tilray. It's a chart. It goes back to August of last year when it IPO'd. This is a marijuana stock. This is a cannabis stock. It was one of the hot cannabis stocks. And I want to just show this as a reminder of the stupidity of crowds, manias, bubbles, and what we've talked about before. This is a stock that at one time traded as high as $300 a share. Okay, and that was in September of 2018. It's now, the thing IPO'd at $17. It's now below its IPO price. It's round tripped. It went from 17 to 300, and now it's down to $16. And this is an example of what happens over and over and over when I talk about human nature and when I talk about how you can be successful by being a contrarian. There was no way I was going to even touch this thing. I was looking at it when it was at 300, thinking about shorting it, but it was just hard to get a position on because so many other people were short. So the carry cost was very high. But you knew this was going to happen. No sales. I mean, very little sales. Just burning cash. I mean, I never understood this about the whole cannabis craze. Whether or not, CBDs, I get it. The research, people are using this, whatever. To each their own. What I didn't get was why people thought that investing in cannabis farming and processing was going to be this huge profitable business. It's not called weed. It's called weed for a reason. It's not hard to grow. Anybody with a potted, it's like potted plant, throw the seeds in there. I knew a guy that used to have some dog pens, and he'd throw some seeds back behind his dog pens and just wash off the dog poop behind it, and these things took off. He didn't even do anything. I mean, the stuff grows wild. So with some big thing, it's just like any other cash crop, like wheat, corn, soybeans, anything else. Anybody can grow it. It's not hard. It's not proprietary. Yes, it was trying to be sold as some of these companies as we're going to create a brand, we're going to be the best processor, or we're going to be organic, or whatever they tried. And this is what you see. Now I have no doubt that after this thing lines out 4 or 5 years, and I'm talking about the cannabis industry as a whole, maybe there'll be some opportunities after it completely gets blown up and then bottoms for 5 or 6 years or 10 years. And then maybe we'll see something come out of it. But right now, I mean, this chart is indicative of what can happen. And I just wanted to show this as a reminder of why you've got to be selective, why you've got to be a critical thinker, why you've got to use your dang head. This happens all the time. This is Bitcoin, okay? This is tech stocks. This is the housing bubble. This is, the Nifty 50 back in the 70s. It just keeps happening over and over and over. And people don't learn because everybody, wants something for nothing. Are investors returning to Canadian oil and gas? I think they are. We've had a big run in an industry that's been down 80 or 90% in some cases. And I think people were missing the fact that a lot of these companies were not facing bankruptcy. In fact, even at $50 or $55 a barrel WTI, they were able to do fairly well on a cash flow basis. So what's happening now? Investors are beginning to look for deep value, and many Canada-based companies are trading close to all-time lows. Not recent lows, all-time lows. It's for several reasons. I mean, the oil price did collapse last year. We had the December massacre, November and December of last year. We got double clutched by the Trump administration on Iran sanctions. Not only that, Canada has had capital leaving it because of the policies of the Trudeau government, not allowing pipelines to be built to get their oil bounty out of the country. They've been fighting with the oil companies for a while. So they had no choice. They've just battened down the hatches, cut costs, slowed down on investing in new production capacity, and just the cash flows have came. So what are they doing with the cash? They're buying back shares and paying down debt. You know, I like, some of the oil sands. If you're a conservative investor or don't want to take as much risk, the oil sands are cash flowing very nicely. Suncor, Canadian National, some smaller ones out there. Why? They've been able to demonstrate that their production does not sharply decline over time. These are long life assets, unlike U.S. shale, which is rolling over, we believe. Canadian companies have cut costs and reined in spending on new production. Cash flows are being used for debt reduction and share buybacks. We've seen cash flow yields anywhere between 10 and 25%. That means after your capital spending, after your maintenance spending, you have left over, 10, 25% of your market cap is free cash flow. So what are they doing? Like I said, buying back shares, and no one else will buy them, they'll buy them. Seeing more and more buyback announcements as the weeks go by. That's Walter Schloss, my big hero of value investing. If a stock price is low and the company's cash flowing, that's what they're going to do. They're going to buy back shares. And it's showing the market that, hey, if no one else will buy our shares, we are going to buy them. And this will have an effect over time. And when money does come back, which it inevitably will, the pendulum will swing back, mean reversion will happen. It looks like it's starting already. Then what you will see is, this will get exacerbated as new fund flows come into these markets or to these stocks. Like I said, sentiment appears to be finally changing, and money is beginning to flow back into Canadian names. So we've got exposure in actionable intelligence alert. I'm looking at other companies. I think that these things are, being given away. I said in a prediction video that I thought that oil prices would be up in 2020, probably not greatly, and they'll probably dip in the first quarter because there's new fields coming on in Guyana and Norway. So remains to be seen. It all kind of depends on what we see happening with shale. I mean, the demand growth is going to be there. We're seeing the money printing. We're seeing the interest rate cuts around the world. We're seeing global PMIs increasing. We're going to see an increase in oil demand like we had last year. Whether it's going to be 1 million to 1.5 million, or maybe 1.8 million, who knows? Barrels per day of new demand. We're going to see demand growth. It just matters like the supply growth. What are we going to see from shales? And we're seeing the Red Queen's race of ever increasing production in the Permian Basin is slowing down now. And so we're seeing the growth in production go down. Will we see it roll over? I don't know. It's projected to grow for the next couple of years, but at a lower and lower rate. We will see what happens. But I think that's your key right there. And inevitably, I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to have an oil crunch, an oil spike, because there just hasn't been enough. The shale, U.S. shale has sucked all of the oxygen and money out of the room. And all the money that should have been invested in non-OPEC conventional around the world, primarily in a lot of offshore basins, just didn't happen, because all of it was sucked into the shales, and the shales have disappointed. Not very many people, I shouldn't say no one, very few companies have been able to make money or even cash flow positive. And so the money spigot's getting turned off. And if you don't have any money, you can't cash flow positively. How are you going to maintain or even much less increase production? Yes, we've seen the majors move, and they have the money to burn. We'll see if they lose money. I mean, I'm not optimistic that they'll do any better. Look what happened to Chevron and the Marcellus Shale. They're moving out and taking a charge. Why? They can't make any money. Persistent low gas prices. So maybe Exxon and Oxy and some of these other folks can do, better in the Permian. But I still don't think that they're going to go nuts increasing production. And what they're doing probably won't be sufficient to overcome the decline rates of the industry as a whole. We will see. Now this gets into this chart I ran into. I wanted to show it because it's not really actionable right now, but we need to keep it on our radar screens. As most people know, I do believe that there is a correlation between sunspot activity and colder, wetter temperatures. I know that's contrarian. I know that's not a popular view. I know it's controversial, but yet that's my view. I've studied the history around when these things happened back in history, 1700s, Little Ice Age, the Norsemen's experiencing Greenland as the climate changed on them, going from warm to cold. And what I wanted to point out here, I had seen this chart before or something similar, but I wanted to point this out to you. I want you to understand how precarious things really are. This is basically a chart or map that shows the primary grain producing areas in Canada: Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. You will note the green area is the present area where wheat is grown, okay? I want you to note something. A 1 degree Celsius drop in average temperatures, look at how far it shrinks down to that light blue area. The green goes away. Now you can only grow wheat in that light blue area. Look what happens if you have a 2 degree Celsius drop in average temperatures. You almost can't grow any grain in Canada. This is what I'm worried about. This is what I think is going to be the issue over the next couple decades. The climate does change, and it changes in ways that people maybe aren't thinking it's going to change. And I think that people are ignoring the fact that, what's happening with the sun is it's going to sleep. I follow guys on YouTube like Ice Age Farmer and Adapt 2030. And I like what the guy on Adapt 2030 says. It's not you, it's not CO2, it's the sun. And people just ignore the cycles of the sun, like it has nothing to do with anything. Like everything's controlled by CO2 on Earth. It's just, I can't get my head wrapped around it. And that's just not what happened. If you can't explain the warmings that happened in the late Roman period, or what happened in Greenland with the Norsemen, or what happened with plunging temperatures based on correlations with low sunspot activity and the Maunder minimum and the Dalton minimums, then I don't want to talk to you, because there was no industrialization, in 1100 AD or in the 1700s in Europe. But there was low sunspots. And I'm not saying that's the overall driver. Like I said, there's all kinds of things that drive climate: cloud cover, oceans, the way that they flow, the way that they retain energy, the sun itself, it cycles, it goes through the places where we are traveling through space, the volcanic activity, all kinds of things. When I'm telling you that if we are in a situation where these people are wrong, and I hope they are right. I hope the Earth is warming and getting greener and with more CO2. I hope that trend continues, because if it doesn't, and this ends up being the reality over the next couple decades, it's not going to be a pleasant reality. And I think, unfortunately, this is going to be the reality. So something to think about. Nothing to worry about in the next year or two. These things take time. But I witnessed what happened up in the Midwest grain growing areas last year when I was there, in the late plantings and the flooding and just the cold that was unprecedented. And it remains to be seen if we see that again. If we start to see a trend, then we have something to worry about. But I think this just shows you how precarious things really are. 1 degree Celsius drop is not much. You've pretty much got rid of, 75% of the areas in Canada where you can grow grain, or wheat at least. Moving on. Hey, we talked about it. One of our themes is going nuts already late here in 2019, going into 2020. What is it? Tanker rates, clean tanker rates. I'm going to put an article from a guy that wrote an article about tankers and scrubbers and high sulfur fuel oil pricing versus low sulfur fuel oil pricing, and how much of a difference it makes to ship owners. What I'm trying to tell you is, we've talked about this before. We're positioned in the Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter. The particular stock that we're holding, which we think is the premier company to hold to take advantage of this trend, is in a definite uptrend. It's not hard to figure out, if you do a little bit of research, what companies we're talking about here. They're even mentioned in this article. Okay? It's kind of like, when you were in school and the teacher was going to give you a test and you would emphasize an issue, you knew that was going to be a question on the test. This is what I'm talking about. And it's not too late. 2020 is going to be, this is when the IMO 2020 regulations come into effect, and you can see the pricing for low sulfur fuel oil is starting to climb in anticipation now. People are starting to stockpile it. It's becoming in demand. There's not enough supply. And look what high sulfur fuel oil, the price has come down. Okay, from about $380 a ton to $350 a ton. There's a big differential. So if you have scrubbers, you can burn this cheap. You can continue to burn this cheap fuel. If you don't have scrubbers, your fuel costs are going up. And fuel costs are one of the largest, or the main cost, in the operating of a ship on a daily basis. So if you took the time to install scrubbers, or in the process of installing scrubbers, you can continue to burn cheap fuel while your competitors are burning expensive fuel. Look at the differential. And that's going to continue. I mean, they're talking about the switch coming on January 1st, and what are they going to do with all of the excess high sulfur fuel oil? I mean, I expect the price to go down even more as we get further into 2020, because people are going to have to shift. Now, there's going to be cheating, obviously. There's going to be people that don't comply, but the majority of the industry is going to have to comply, especially if you're coming to big ports. Just not going to allow it. You could sneak into some rinky-dink port in Africa probably and not have a scrubber and burn high sulfur fuel oil. Nobody will say anything. But you're not going to do it in, Long Beach. You're not going to do it in Singapore. These are, some of the main shipping hubs. So I think this chart and this particular understanding, this is where it comes in, where you really have to understand what's going on. Now, not all shipping is doing well. I suspect it will over the next couple of years. I believe that it will leak into other parts of the industry. Remember what I said, it has about 8 or 9 subsectors, so you need to really be careful and understand. But right now, tankers are hot, and there's certain tanker companies that had enough prescience to put scrubbers on, and they are minting money. Literally, obscene profits are going to happen in Q4 and Q1, and then you're going to see big dividends being paid, and that's going to bring attention to this sector, and then you're going to see money really start flowing in. There's no reason why you couldn't see, over the next year, 18 months, some of these stocks double and then double again. I want to bring your attention to gold back above 1,500. Why wouldn't it be? With all the money printing, with all the central bank malfeasance around the world, everybody's cutting rates. Everybody's talking about reflationary trades now. The dollar is starting to roll over. The debts. I mean, nothing's getting better. We're in a false prosperity. It's going to probably have a blow off top this year. Going into the election of Donald Trump, he'll get reelected. You have a blow off top in the stock market. I think a lot of the commodities are going to rally just because of what's happening around the world with the reflation. And then they're going to have a real big bad hangover in the next couple of years after that. So right now, this looks good. It's moving in our direction. We've got a couple companies. One of my best performing stocks in the portfolio is a small royalty company. It's up around 100% since we recommended it, and we suspect that it will continue moving higher. We also have other ways of taking advantage. We have a small mining company that's turning around, and we'll be looking at other companies to take advantage of this, what we think is going to be a pretty decent year for precious metals. I mean, it was a pretty good year last year, and it's kind of ignored by a lot of people. It was overshadowed by the stock market. But I think that, the leverage that you can get in some of these mining companies, we're going to be taking more of a look at it here in the next year. So just wanted to bring your attention to this, not really reported too highly. but that's a pretty decent move last week. And, you know, we'll see if it looks like it could be similar to this breakout that you saw down here. It's kind of setting up the same way, but we'll have to see how it goes. All right, guys, that's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Please continue to follow. If you're not following the channel, please follow it, hit the bell, comment. These all help us to get on the radar of YouTube's algorithm and get ourselves, shown to other folks. So really would like people to take a chance and try out the Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But if you just want to support me, you enjoy my videos, you can really just support us by, following us, commenting, hitting the bell, sharing the videos. And I'd also like to mention you can become a Patreon. You can go to Patreon. We'll put a link to that. And if you care to support us there, if you support us with a minimum donation of $5 per month, I will send you the next month's Actionable Intelligence Alert newsletter stock pick. That's a one-time thing only. You're not getting a subscription. You're just getting that one stock pick for the next issue. But that's something we'd like to give folks so they can see what our writing's about and whether they agree with the way we do our thinking and how we create our investment theses. So that's it for this week, guys. Again, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for tuning in.